The only sounds were the quiet hum of the pool pump and the electric buzz of cicadas in the dry Arizona dark. It was after midnight. The air was still hot, smelling of dust and distant creosote bushes. I was on my knees by the edge of my pool, my laptop open beside me, its screen casting a blue glow on the perfectly still water. This was my sanctuary, a 12-foot deep pool I'd designed myself, not for parties, but for silence, for the cool, weightless embrace after a long day of staring at code. I was calibrating the filtration system, tweaking the algorithms to minimize water loss. It was a little obsession of mine. In a place like this, every drop counts. This is my story. And if you're watching Karenology, you know it's never just about a deep pool. It's always about something else. Then, light sliced through the darkness. A pair of headlights washed over my backyard, freezing me in their glare like a startled animal. A car door slammed shut with a sound that felt like a violation of the night's peace. The crunch of gravel under expensive-looking shoes followed. I stood up slowly, shielding my eyes. Two figures emerged from the glare. One was a woman in a crisp white pantsuit that seemed absurd for the time and place. It was Barbara, the self-appointed head of our neighborhood's little eco-initiative. Behind her, a large silent man stood with the impassive posture of a government official who'd seen it all and was impressed by none of it. Barbara stopped at the edge of my patio, her arms crossed. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. "Working late, Miss Chen?" she asked, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "Just running diagnostics," I said, my voice flat. I didn't invite them in. I didn't want them here. This was my space. "Diagnostics," she repeated, savoring the word as if it were a joke. She gestured grandly at my pool. "Or maybe just admiring your work. Your personal ocean, while the rest of us are letting our lawns turn to dust." She turned to the silent man. "This is it, Inspector. This is the source of the problem." I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. What problem? The inspector stepped forward, ignoring me completely. He walked over to the main water valve that fed the pool's autofill system. He pulled a small, official-looking tag and a metal seal from his pocket. Barbara's smile widened. "Your pool, Miss Chen," she announced, as if to an audience, "is sucking our town dry. We've had reports. The Water Authority has confirmed it. Your property has the highest water consumption in a 5-mile radius." My mind raced. It was impossible. "That can't be right," I said, taking a step forward. "This is a closed-loop system. I have a solar cover. The evaporation rate is less than a kiddie pool's. I have the data right here." I pointed at my laptop. Barbara let out a little laugh. "Oh, we don't need your data," she said with disdain. "We have official readings." The inspector finished his work. The metal seal was crimped onto the valve. A bright red tag hung from it, reading "Violation." He turned and handed me a folded piece of paper. His first and only words of the night were a low rumble. "The meters don't lie." I unfolded the paper, my breath caught. At the top, in bold letters, "Penalty Assessment." And at the bottom, a number that made my vision swim. $10,000. Have you ever been handed a piece of paper that just felt unreal? A bill for something you didn't do? A penalty that makes no sense? It's a strange, hollow feeling. If you've been there, you know what to do with that like button. My fingers instinctively found the cool metal of the flash drive I wear as a pendant around my neck. It was an old habit from a past life, a reminder of a career torpedoed by a lie, by data someone else had twisted. And here it was again. A different lie, a different set of numbers, but the same suffocating feeling of being framed. "You'll pay the fine, Miss Chen," Barbara said, her voice now cold and businesslike. She was already turning to leave. "It's for the good of the community." They walked away, their shadows stretching long in the headlights before they disappeared into the car. The engine started, and they drove off, leaving behind a cloud of dust and a ringing silence. I stood there for a long time, just looking at the red tag on my sealed valve. The fine felt heavy in my hand. He said, "The meters don't lie." And in that moment, standing in the dark, I decided something. Fine, we'll talk about meters. That red tag hung on my water valve like a tiny, arrogant flag of occupation. The sun rose, painting the Arizona sky in shades of orange and purple. But all I could see was that infuriating piece of plastic. It was a declaration of war. By 8 a.m., I was showered, dressed, and holding the $10,000 fine in my hand. The paper felt slick and impersonal. I was going to the water authority. The building was exactly what you'd expect. A low, beige box smelling faintly of industrial cleaner and quiet desperation. The air inside was cool and recycled, and the hum of fluorescent lights was the only soundtrack. I waited in line behind a woman arguing about a $30 late fee and a man who just looked defeated before he even spoke. When it was my turn, I placed the fine on the counter. "I need to speak to someone about this," I said to the clerk, whose face was a mask of practiced indifference. "There's a mistake." She glanced at the paper, typed something into her computer, and shook her head without looking up. "The reading is official, ma'am. You can pay at the cashier's window or online." "I'm not paying for a mistake," I insisted, my voice firmer than I intended. "I want to see the inspector who signed this, or his supervisor." She sighed, a tiny put-upon sound. After a 10-minute wait that felt like an hour, I was led into a small gray cubicle to meet a man named Mr. Davis. He wasn't the inspector, but his supervisor. He had a tired face and a coffee mug that said, "Don't talk to me before I've had my coffee." It was almost 9 a.m. I had a bad feeling. I laid it all out for him. I pulled out my tablet and showed him my pool system diagnostics, the logs from my custom software, the week-over-week water consumption data that was so low it was practically a rounding error. "Look," I said, pointing to a graph. "The system is self-contained. The water level is constant. There are no leaks. It is physically impossible for me to be using this much water." He listened, steepled his fingers, and then turned to his own monitor. He clicked a few times, and a single stark bar graph popped up. It showed the water usage for a dozen properties on my street. All of them were flat, modest lines. Then there was mine, a single monstrous blue bar that shot up to the top of the chart. "The data is the data, Miss Chen," he said, not unkindly, but with the finality of a judge. "Our new smart meters are calibrated and tested. They don't lie." "But where is the water going?" I asked, my frustration boiling over. "If I used that much water, my house would be a swamp. My pool would be overflowing. This isn't just about my meter, don't you see? There's a massive discrepancy somewhere." He leaned back, his chair creaking. "The inspector's report is official. He's certified. If you wish to dispute the findings, you can file a formal appeal. The forms are at the front desk." A sliver of hope. "Okay, how long does an appeal take?" Mr. Davis took a slow sip of his coffee. "The review board meets twice a year. With the current backlog, I'd say 6, maybe 8 months." He paused, letting the weight of that settle. "The fines, of course, continue to accrue during that period, $500 a day." That was it. That was the trap. A bureaucratic black hole designed to make you give up. To make you pay just to stop the bleeding. It was a perfectly legal, perfectly constructed wall of silence. I felt my hands clench into fists. Have you ever felt that specific kind of rage? The kind where you're screaming on the inside, but on the outside, you just have to nod and say thank you? I walked out of that beige building and back into the blinding sun. The heat felt oppressive. I got into my car and just sat there, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. My mind was a whirlwind of numbers, lies, and that smug look on Barbara's face. I pulled out my phone, thinking I'd start researching lawyers. But my thumb, acting on its own, opened our neighborhood's community forum app. And there it was, a new post, right at the top, from Barbara. It had been up for less than an hour. The headline hit me like a punch to the gut. "Is your garden dying? Ask your neighbor with the Olympic pool." The post was a masterpiece of passive-aggressive poison. It started with a flowery paragraph about community spirit and the shared sacrifice of living in a desert. Then it pivoted. "Some of us," Barbara had written, "are doing our part. We're letting our lawns go golden. We're taking shorter showers. But it seems not everyone got the memo." She didn't use my name. She didn't have to. She'd posted a picture, a long-distance shot of my house, with my deep blue pool gleaming like a sapphire in the sun. The photo was artfully framed to make my yard look like a decadent oasis surrounded by a parched wasteland. The comments rolled in like a flash flood. "I knew it. My water pressure has been terrible for weeks." "Unbelievable selfishness. My kids can't even run in the sprinkler." "That pool is a disgrace. The homeowners association should do something." The funny thing is, we didn't have a homeowners association. Barbara's Green Roots initiative was just her own little fiefdom. A social club she'd turned into a weapon. But people didn't care about the details. They had a villain. They had me. I scrolled, my thumb feeling numb. Someone had posted my address. Another person, a freelance graphic designer who lived a few streets over, wrote, "She's in IT, works from home, probably makes a fortune. Easy to waste water when you're not paying for it with real sweat." That one cut deep. My freelance contracts were my lifeline. My reputation was everything. I tried to type a response to explain the closed-loop system, the solar cover, the actual data, but my words looked pathetic and defensive next to the rising tide of outrage. Every time I hit refresh, there were a dozen new comments, each one nastier than the last. They were calling me the Water Witch of Whisper Creek. My phone buzzed with a notification from my business email. It was from a new client, a big one I'd just landed. The subject line was regarding our contract. My heart sank. The email was polite but firm. They'd become aware of some community concerns and felt it was best to postpone our engagement until these issues are resolved. Postpone. I knew what that meant. It was a firing, a quiet professional shiv in the ribs. The $10,000 fine was bad. This was worse. This was my livelihood. This was Barbara taking the fight from my backyard to my bank account. I threw the phone onto the passenger seat. I felt cornered, suffocated. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It was a digital witch hunt, and I was the one tied to the stake. Have you ever had your reputation attacked online? It feels like being pelted with invisible stones. There's nowhere to hide. I drove home, the angry words from the forum echoing in my head. I pulled into my driveway and saw him, an old man in a faded work shirt, kneeling by the water meter at the edge of my property. He had a small toolbox open beside him and was tapping the dusty metal cover with the handle of a wrench. My first instinct was suspicion. Was this another one of Barbara's cronies here to tamper with evidence? I got out of the car, ready for a fight. "Can I help you?" I asked, my voice sharp. He looked up, squinting against the sun. His face was a roadmap of wrinkles, his hands calloused and stained with what looked like a lifetime of plumbing work. He didn't seem surprised to see me. "Maybe," he grunted, getting to his feet with a groan. "Name's Carlos. Lived here 30 years. Was a plumber for the county before I retired." He gestured with his wrench toward my house, then down the street. "This whole neighborhood, we've got a problem, and I can tell you one thing for sure, lady." He paused, looking me straight in the eye. "It ain't your swimming pool." He then pointed the wrench at the ground, a few feet from the meter. "The problem," he said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, "is right under our feet, and it's been there for a very, very long time." I led Carlos into my garage, the only place cool enough to think. The air smelled of old oil and sun-baked concrete. He wiped his hands on a rag and took the glass of iced water I offered, downing half of it in one go. "Thanks," he rasped. "It's a hot one." He got right to the point. "These pipes," he began, drawing an invisible map on my dusty workbench with his finger. "They were laid down in the late 70s, cast iron, supposed to last 50 years. The thing is, our soil here, it's alkaline, eats right through iron. The county knows it. They've been patching leaks for decades instead of doing a full replacement. Too expensive, you see." He looked at me, his eyes sharp. "Your meter is at the end of a long branch line. If there's a major leak anywhere between the main trunk and your property, the smart meter system, it's not so smart. It registers all that lost water as consumption at the final endpoint. You. It was like a key turning in a lock, the single monstrous bar on the Water Authority's graph. The discrepancy I couldn't explain. So, I'm being billed for a massive hidden leak in the public infrastructure." "Bingo," he said, tapping the workbench. "And I bet Barbara knows it. Her late husband was on the county planning commission for a decade. He knew where all the skeletons were buried, literally." The pieces were clicking together, but it was still just a theory, a retired plumber's word against an official reading. I needed proof. I needed data. And that's where I live. You see, when your career is built on finding needles in digital haystacks, your mind works a certain way. "The Water Authority has a public API," I murmured, thinking aloud. "It's meant for residents to track their own usage. It's clunky. Nobody uses it, but the data should be there." As I spoke, a shadow fell across the open garage door. A young man, maybe early 20s, stood there awkwardly. He was holding a laptop. Miss Chen?" he asked, his voice hesitant. "I'm Jake, from down the street. I saw the post. It's not right." He was a kid I'd seen around, always with headphones on. "I'm a programmer," he said, stepping into the garage. "I read your reply before they deleted it, about the closed-loop system. It made sense. What they're doing, it's a denial of service attack, but with social media." I couldn't help but smile. He spoke my language. "I want to help," he said, his earnestness cutting through my cynicism. "I'm good with APIs." And just like that, I had a team. The Ghostbusters of Whisper Creek, me, the data analyst, Carlos, the hardware expert, and Jake, the code wizard. We huddled around my workbench, the three of us an unlikely trio of rebels. For the next 2 days, we worked. Carlos, with his encyclopedic knowledge of the town's guts, pinpointed 3 likely locations for a major leak along my branch line. As Jake, his fingers flying across his keyboard, pulled raw data from the Water Authority's public portal. He bypassed the user-friendly charts and went straight to the source logs. And there it was, in the raw, unfiltered numbers, the smoking gun. "Look," I said, pointing at the screen. We had the total volume of water entering our neighborhood's main trunk line, and Jake had aggregated the individual consumption data from every single smart meter in our zone. We put them side by side. The numbers didn't match, not even close. 40%, Jake whispered, his eyes wide. 40% of the water that comes into this neighborhood, it just vanishes before it ever reaches a house. We had it, cold, hard proof, a massive systemic failure. It wasn't me, it was the pipes, just as Carlos had said. I felt a surge of adrenaline, of vindication. I finally had the weapon I needed. I spent the rest of the day putting it into a presentation. Clear, simple charts, irrefutable numbers. I requested a spot at the next Green Roots Initiative meeting, which Barbara held weekly in the community clubhouse. She agreed, her email dripping with condescending amusement, probably imagining I was coming to beg for mercy. She had no idea what was coming. I was going to walk into her stronghold and dismantle her lies, piece by digital piece, in front of everyone. The night of the meeting, I felt a nervous energy I hadn't felt in years. I checked my reflection before leaving. I looked tired, but my eyes were clear. This wasn't just about a fine anymore. It was about the truth. I grabbed my tablet, took a deep breath, and walked out to my car. But I stopped short. The air was suddenly thick with the smell of chemicals. I looked toward my backyard, and my heart stopped. Someone had thrown 3 large ripped-open bags of something into my pool. They were sinking slowly, leaving cloudy trails behind them. On the side of one of the bags, I could just make out the words, "Quickset Concrete." The bags of concrete hit the water with a dull, sickening thud. It wasn't a loud noise, but in the quiet of the evening, it echoed like a gunshot. For a second, I just stood there, paralyzed. My sanctuary, my place of peace, was being violated, filled with gray sludge. The chemical smell of cement dust burned my nostrils. Then, the shock turned to ice-cold fury. This was a physical escalation. A line had been crossed. This wasn't a nasty comment online or a bureaucratic fine. This was vandalism. This was a direct threat. My presentation, my beautiful data, suddenly felt fragile and abstract. How do you fight concrete with a bar graph? I almost called the sheriff, but I stopped myself. What would I say? That someone threw bags into my pool? There were no cameras, no witnesses. It would be my word against theirs, another report filed and forgotten. This required a different response. I walked to the edge of the pool. The bags were already dissolving, the powder blooming into a thick gray cloud that was slowly hardening on the bottom. My pool was dying, but my mind was already moving. I took out my phone, documented everything with photos, then went to the garage and grabbed a small sample jar. I carefully scooped up some of the water and the gray slurry. Evidence. Always collect the evidence. An hour later, I walked into the community clubhouse. The room was packed. The air was thick with the scent of cheap coffee and self-righteousness. Barbara was at the front, beaming, basking in the adoration of her followers. She saw me enter, and a flicker of triumph crossed her face. She probably expected me to be hysterical, defeated. I was anything but. When my turn came to speak, I walked to the podium and set down my tablet. The room went quiet. I could feel their collective gaze on me, a mixture of pity, contempt, and morbid curiosity. Good evening, I began, my voice steady. Many of you know me as the Water Witch of Whisper Creek. You've been told I'm stealing your water. I put my first slide up on the projector screen. It showed the Water Authority's own data, the 40% discrepancy, the black hole in our water system. The truth, I said, letting my voice fill the room, is that nearly half the water supplied to our neighborhood is lost to leaks before it ever reaches our homes. We are all paying for water that spills into the dirt. I walked them through the numbers, my voice calm and methodical. I showed them Jake's analysis, Carlos's theory about the old pipes. I could see the looks on their faces changing. Doubt was creeping in, confusion. A few people were starting to frown, looking at Barbara. This was my moment. I was winning. Then Barbara stood up, a placid smile on her face. "That's a very creative story, Miss Chen," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "A wonderful work of fiction. But we deal in facts." She held up a single sheet of paper. "This is the official, signed and stamped report from the Water Authority inspector. It states, unequivocally, that the source of the excessive usage is your property." She looked around the room, making eye contact with her supporters. "What are you going to believe? A bunch of confusing pictures on a screen from a disgruntled homeowner, or the official findings of a certified professional?" The room shifted. The doubt in their eyes was replaced by the old, familiar suspicion. It was so simple, so brutally effective. My complex data versus her simple official lie. In the court of public opinion, the simple lie always wins. Have you ever tried to explain a complex truth to a crowd that wants a simple villain? It's like trying to teach calculus to a mob. People started murmuring. "She has a point." The inspector wouldn't lie. Barbara moved in for the kill. "I think Miss Chen is just trying to distract from her own responsibility. In fact, her flagrant waste is so severe, we've started a petition to have the county declare her pool a public nuisance and have it drained, for the good of the community." She held up a clipboard thick with signatures. A wave of applause filled the room. I stood there at the podium, my tablet screen glowing with useless truth. I had lost. I had walked into the lion's den with what I thought was a bazooka, and it had turned out to be a water pistol. I packed up my tablet in silence and walked out, the sound of their clapping following me like a jeer. I got in my car, the sample jar of gray sludge sitting on the passenger seat. My perfect data, my airtight logic. It meant nothing. They hadn't just defeated me. They had humiliated me. As I drove away, I glanced back at the clubhouse. Barbara was standing outside, bathed in the warm light from the doorway, accepting handshakes and congratulations. Her victory was absolute. And in that moment, sitting alone in my car in the dark, I felt something break inside me. It was the feeling of hitting rock bottom, but you know what they say about rock bottom. It's a solid place to build from. And as I looked at the ruined state of my pool, an idea began to form. A wild, crazy, and utterly terrifying idea. It started with a simple question. If my water was disappearing into the ground, where was it going? That night, sleep was a foreign country I couldn't visit. I sat by my ruined pool, the ghostly gray shapes of hardened concrete on the bottom, and I thought. I wasn't a plumber. I wasn't a geologist. I was a data analyst. My brain finds patterns in chaos. The chaos was the leak. The pattern was where the water went. I pulled up satellite maps of our neighborhood, toggling between different spectrums, infrared, topographical. I cross-referenced them with the old county schematics Carlos had given me. It was a digital treasure hunt. And then I saw it. It wasn't a big thing, just a slight discoloration in the satellite imagery, a patch of ground that was subtly, consistently cooler than the surrounding earth. It was a faint, ghostly line that ran from the main water trunk, passed near my property, and ended in the middle of the community park, the very park where Barbara held her rallies and fundraisers. The next morning, I called Carlos. There was a new urgency in my voice. "Carlos, you said the ground near my meter was damp. What if it's not just damp? What if it's a channel?" He was at my house in 20 minutes. He brought a tool I'd never seen before, a long metal probe with a listening device on the end. We went to the spot by the meter. He pushed the probe deep into the soil. He put on a pair of headphones, closed his eyes, and listened. A slow grin spread across his face. "Well, I'll be," he whispered. "I hear it. It's faint. But it's there. The sound of running water. It was the confirmation I needed. The ghost was real. My mind, now running at 1,000 miles an hour, started to assemble a plan. It was reckless. It was theatrical. It was probably illegal in half a dozen ways. But it was all I had left. "Jake," I said into my phone a few minutes later, pacing my living room, "I need you to do something for me. I need you to find a vulnerability in the water main's pressure control system. I don't want you to do anything with it. I just need to know if you can create a temporary controlled pressure spike on command." There was a silence on the other end of the line. "Maya," he said, his voice hesitant. That sounds like federal crime territory." "I'm not asking you to break anything, Jake. I'm asking you to knock on a digital door. See if it's unlocked. Can you do it?" Another pause, then "I'll see what I can find." My final call was to a specialty chemical supplier online. I ordered a 5-gallon drum of food-grade, non-toxic, highly concentrated water tracing dye. The color was called ultramarine blue. It was the most brilliantly, obnoxiously blue substance known to man. It was scheduled for overnight delivery. The plan was simple and insane. If there was a hidden river flowing under our feet, I was going to make it visible. I was going to turn our town's biggest secret into a public spectacle. Carlos looked at me, his eyes wide as I explained it. "You're crazy," he said. Then he grinned again. "I'm in." The next afternoon, the drum of blue dye arrived. It was heavier than I expected. That night, under the cover of darkness, Carlos and I went to work. The concrete in my pool was a lost cause, but the circulation system still worked. We bypassed the filters. Carlos, with his plumber's magic, created a direct injection point into the main circulation pipe. We were turning my swimming pool into the payload delivery system for a giant squirt gun aimed at the heart of the town's hypocrisy. Just after midnight, Jake called. "I'm in," he said, his voice a mix of terror and excitement. "It's an old legacy system. The security is a joke. I can control the primary pump regulator for subsector 7. I can give you a 20 psi spike for about 90 seconds before the automated safeties kick in." "That's all I need," I said, my heart pounding. Everything was in place. The stage was set. Barbara's biggest event of the year was the annual Green Roots Festival in the park. It was scheduled for the next day. The mayor was going to be there. The local news was going to be there. They were set to present Barbara with a check for a $100,000 city grant for her water conservation efforts. Oh, the irony was thick enough to bottle. I looked at Carlos, the giant drum of blue dye sitting between us like an unexploded bomb. We were about to commit a major act of civic disobedience. I felt a tremor of fear, but it was quickly replaced by a cold, clear resolve. They had pushed me into a corner. They had attacked my home, my reputation, my livelihood. They thought they had broken me. They didn't realize they had just shown me exactly where to dig. And now I had a shovel, a very, very blue shovel. The day of the festival was bright and hot, the kind of day that makes you thirsty just by looking out the window. The park was filled with people. There were families on blankets, kids chasing each other, and a stage decorated with green and white bunting. At the center of it all was Barbara, glowing, shaking hands, playing the role of the town's environmental savior. I arrived late, slipping through the crowd, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. I wore a simple dark dress. I wanted to look like a shadow. Up on the stage, the mayor was at the podium, a giant novelty check in his hands, singing Barbara's praises. My phone buzzed in my hand, a single text from Jake. "Ready when you are." I texted Carlos, who was waiting by my pool, with the same message. His reply was a simple thumbs-up emoji. This was it, the point of no return. Have you ever stood on a diving board, high above the water, knowing that once you jump, you can't go back? That was me, in that moment. I took a deep breath and started walking toward the stage. People turned to look. A murmur went through the crowd. I was the villain from the internet, the water witch, and I was walking toward their queen. I could feel their hostility like a physical force. Barbara saw me, and her smile tightened. 2 burly volunteers moved to block my path. I didn't try to fight them. I just stopped a few feet from the stage and raised my voice. "Mayor," I called out, "before you hand over that check, there's something everyone here deserves to see." My voice wasn't loud, but it was clear, and it cut through the festive noise. The mayor paused, looking confused. Barbara shot me a look of pure venom. She whispered something to one of the volunteers, and he started toward me, his face set in a grim line. I held up my phone and sent the text to Jake. Now. For a few seconds, nothing happened. The volunteer was getting closer. The crowd was jeering. I felt a spike of pure terror. What if it didn't work? What if I was just a crazy woman making a scene? And then the ground trembled. It was subtle at first, a faint shudder under our feet. Then, from a spot in the grass right in the middle of the park, maybe 50 feet from the stage, a tiny geyser of dirt shot into the air. It was followed by a trickle of water. Bright, impossible, ultramarine blue water. The trickle became a gush. The gush became a fountain. A brilliant blue plume of water erupted from the earth, shooting 10 feet into the air, showering the perfect green lawn with my evidence. The crowd gasped. They fell silent, their phones all turning from the stage to the impossible blue fountain that had just sprung from the ground. I held up my phone again, this time hitting the call button. I had put it on speaker. "Carlos," I said, my voice ringing out in the sudden silence. "Can you confirm that you have just injected 5 gallons of non-toxic food-grade tracer dye into my pool's circulation system?" Carlos's voice, tinny and proud, crackled from the phone. "Confirmed, Maya. She's all blue." I turned my gaze to the stage, to Barbara. Her face was a mask of horror. The color had drained from it, as if it had all been siphoned into the fountain behind her. "That," I announced to the stunned crowd, "is the 40%. That is the water we've all been paying for. It's been leaking from a broken main for years, flowing in a hidden channel right under this park." Barbara knew. Her committee was created not to save water, but to hide this leak and get grant money by blaming homeowners like me. I walked over to the geyser. The blue water was soaking my shoes, but I didn't care. I held up my phone, showing everyone the satellite image with the cool, dark line of the underground leak. "The data doesn't lie," I said, looking straight at Barbara, "and neither does this." The silence was broken by one person, then another, pulling out their phones and recording. The local news camera swung away from the mayor and focused on the blue fountain. The game was over. The aftermath was swift. The mayor snatched back the check. The city launched an immediate investigation. Barbara and the water inspector were buried in lawsuits from the city and a class action from the residents. Her Green Roots initiative dissolved overnight. A few weeks later, the city offered me a lucrative contract to be a consultant for a full audit of the water infrastructure. It was everything I'd lost: money, respect, a career. I turned it down. Instead, I spent a month working with Jake to build a public dashboard, a free open-source platform where any resident could log on and see the water system in real time. The pressure, the flow, the discrepancies, no more secrets, no more lies hidden in the dirt. At the small press conference we held to launch it, I held up the flash drive from around my neck, the one that held the ghosts of my old career. In front of everyone, I plugged it into my laptop and clicked Format. The drive was wiped clean. Some data, I realized, is a prison, and some data sets you free. My pool is clean now. The city paid for the repairs. Sometimes I still sit by it at night, listening to the hum of the pump. I won. I cleared my name and brought the truth to light. But there's a price to victory. My quiet, anonymous life is gone. I'm a public figure now, the woman who made the ground turn blue. People wave at me in the grocery store. They ask me for advice about their own battles. I lost my solitude. Maybe that was the final leak I had to plug. My phone rings. It's a number I don't recognize. My old boss, the one who stole my work and ruined my career years ago. He's seen my story on the news. He's offering me a job, a senior position, a fat paycheck. I look out at the calm, clear water of my pool. I think about the person I was, the one who would have jumped at that chance, the one who lived in fear. I'm not that person anymore. I press the block contact button and put the phone down. The water is perfectly still, reflecting the vast, quiet desert sky. And for the first time in a long time, so am I.